What happens when a wife thinks a small workplace secret will stay hidden forever? Why does the first envelope she receives from her husband's lawyer shatter her job, reputation, and marriage in one moment? Can someone who thought she controlled the story survive when the legal result arrives in public? Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm not supposed to be the cautionary tale. At least, that's what I told myself every time I slipped into Damon's office and let him promise things he never planned to deliver. I thought I was being strategic, ambitious, clever. I thought a little secret wouldn't hurt anyone, not really. After all, Elias wouldn't understand the pressure at my job, the late nights, the way success sometimes requires flexibility. That's what I called it, flexibility, because the truth sounded uglier when spoken plainly. For months, I convinced myself I was in control. Damon praised my work, hinted at promotions, made me feel special in a way Elias never could. And whenever guilt tried to whisper that I was crossing a line, I told myself Elias was too sensitive, too slow, too stuck in his quiet little world to appreciate what I was becoming. My friends even joked that he should be grateful to have someone going places. I believed every word. So when the envelope landed in my hands, right there in the lobby, in front of everyone, I didn't understand at first. I thought it had to be a mistake or some overreaction. But it wasn't. It was the consequence I never thought would reach me. I'm not proud of how the first signs showed themselves. Back then, I told myself everything was normal, that I was just tired from work and Elias was being needy. Now I see how carefully I wrapped the truth in excuses, but at the time I felt completely justified. That morning started like any other. Elias was in the kitchen making coffee, moving slow like he always did before sunrise. He asked if I wanted breakfast. I said I didn't have time. He asked if I could come home early. I said he was being clingy again. He didn't argue. He just nodded and kept stirring the pot like my words didn't poke holes in him. I hated that calm look he used when he didn't want to fight. It made me feel like the difficult one, which of course I told myself I wasn't. At the office, Damon smiled at me the way people do when they know you're useful. Not warm, not friendly, but focused, like I was a tool he kept polished. I liked it. He asked how I handled the report so fast. I said something about discipline. He laughed and said I had potential. When someone like Damon used that word, it meant something. I didn't tell Elias about comments like these. He wouldn't understand. He lived in a world where hard work was its own reward. In my world, being noticed was the currency. At lunch, a few coworkers asked if I was okay, because I looked stressed. I said Elias didn't get my job and kept nagging me about coming home earlier. They rolled their eyes on my behalf. One even joked that men like him only wanted wives who sat quietly in the background. I laughed along because it made me feel validated. I didn't realize I was feeding a script that would later turn against me. But in that moment, it felt good to paint Elias as the slow one, the boring one, the one holding me back. After work, Damon asked if I could stay late to help prepare for a client visit. He didn't need help. He wanted company. I knew that and still said yes. I texted Elias that I had a sudden workload issue. He replied with a simple, "Okay, be safe." That annoyed me for some reason. No guilt trip, no questions, nothing. Just calm acceptance, which made me feel like he wasn't invested enough to fight for my time. I told myself that was his flaw, not mine. While Damon and I worked, he kept moving closer. He asked what my long-term goals were. I said I was tired of being overlooked. He said he could change that. His voice had that confident tone people admire. It made me feel capable in a way Elias never managed to. I let that feeling settle in me, warm and sharp. When Damon brushed my arm, I didn't step back. I didn't go forward either. I just let it sit there like a secret I wasn't ready to name. When I finally came home, Elias was on the couch reading. He looked up with a small smile. I told him he should be asleep. He said he wanted to wait for me. I rolled my eyes because it felt dramatic. He asked if everything was okay at work. I said he was reading too much into things. He said he just wanted to understand. I told him understanding wasn't his strong suit. He didn't argue. He only asked if I'd eaten. Somehow that question irritated me even more. I said I wasn't hungry and went to shower. In the bathroom, I stared at myself for a long time. I tried to convince myself I was only frustrated because I wanted more out of life. I said I was doing what anyone would do, but a quiet part of me wondered why I was starting to hide parts of my day. I pushed that thought away. I told myself Elias just didn't get ambition. The next day was worse. At work, Damon praised me in front of the team. He said I was the reason our department stayed organized. I pretended to be modest, but inside, I felt a glow I didn't get at home. Coworkers whispered that Damon admired me. One even asked if Elias was jealous. I laughed and said Elias didn't notice much. That wasn't true, but it sounded good. It made me feel like I was in control, like I had something people envied. When I left that evening, Damon held the elevator for me. He asked if I wanted to grab a drink to celebrate the progress we made. I hesitated, but only for show. I said I wasn't sure. He said, "One drink doesn't hurt anyone." I knew what he meant. I went anyway. At the bar, he sat too close. He asked personal questions in that slow, easy tone. I answered them even though I knew I should pull back. I didn't. I told myself it was harmless, that successful people network like this. That lie tasted sweet and easy. When I came home late again, Elias was sitting on the balcony. He asked if everything was okay. I said he was being controlling. He said he was just asking. I told him to stop acting like my father. He went quiet again. I hated that silence, but I hated the idea of admitting I was wrong even more. Later, I checked his phone on the counter. A calendar reminder popped up. Personal meeting, 7:40 p.m. I froze for a second. Elias never scheduled personal meetings. I told myself it must be a gym thing or an errand. I ignored the uncomfortable feeling it gave me. At bedtime, he placed his mug on the opposite counter from mine. A small thing, barely anything. But it felt like distance. I pretended not to care. I told myself he would calm down and I would get my promotion soon. The truth, which I didn't want to face then, was that something had already shifted between us. But I convinced myself I was still the one in control. I told myself everything was going exactly how I planned. I didn't realize how wrong I was until much later. But in that first week, the lies felt easy, the attention felt good, and the small alarms around me were too soft for me to bother noticing. And Elias, sitting quietly in the next room, had already stopped believing my excuses. I walked into the office the next morning feeling like I deserved something. Damon had been warm the night before, and I convinced myself it meant the promotion was close. I even straightened my back when I passed the front desk, acting like someone important. Inside, the team was gathered around the coffee machine. They went quiet for a moment, then gave me those curious looks people give when they've been talking about you. I pretended not to notice. I asked if anyone needed help with the morning tasks. One of them said I must really love working late. I laughed and said someone had to step up in this office. They laughed with me, and the attention felt good. Around midday, Damon called me into the small conference room to go over the client strategy. The room was too quiet. The blinds were half closed. He stood closer than he needed to. He pointed at a chart on the screen and asked if I understood the long-term plan. I said of course I did. He nodded and said I was reliable in a way others weren't. I felt that familiar spark of pride. He asked if I liked the direction I was heading. I said yes without thinking. He smiled like I had passed some test only he knew about. When he stepped back, I felt a pull to step forward, but I didn't. Not yet. At lunch, a few coworkers invited me out. At the table, the conversation shifted quickly to relationships. One asked how Elias was doing. I shrugged and said he didn't understand my work life. They nodded as if they expected that answer. I added that he didn't like how late I'd been staying, and they joked that men always get scared when their wives grow. Their words wrapped around me like comfort. I didn't correct them. I didn't say Elias never tried to stop me. I didn't say he just asked simple questions. Painting him as the insecure one made me feel stronger, even if it wasn't true. After work, I saw Damon talking with the regional director. Both glanced at me when I walked by. I pretended not to see it, but inside, I took it as a sign that Damon was preparing something bigger for me. On the way home, I checked my phone and saw I'd barely texted Elias all day. He had sent a single message asking if he should start dinner. I replied hours late with a short, "I already ate." When I walked through the door, he was sitting at the kitchen table, reading some notes from his job. He looked up and smiled gently. He asked if my day went well. I said it was fine. He asked if I wanted tea. I said I wasn't in the mood. He hesitated before telling me his mother had invited us to dinner the next evening. I sighed loudly and said I was tired of family gatherings. He said we hadn't visited in a while. I said work came first. He didn't argue. He just nodded, and for some reason, that calm acceptance irritated me again. I went to the bedroom to change, slamming the drawer harder than I meant to. He didn't comment. He just gave me space like he always did. The next day at the office, things felt different. People whispered more. When I approached the break room, I heard my name. The whispers stopped as soon as I entered. One woman asked if everything was okay between me and Elias. I asked why she cared. She said she saw a picture online from last week's team outing. She showed me. It was a group photo, but I was standing close to Damon. Too close. I said she was reading into things. She nodded slowly, not believing me but pretending to. When I got home that evening, Elias was already dressed for his mother's dinner. I had forgotten. I told him I didn't feel like going. He said we already promised. I said he could go alone. His shoulders dropped slightly, not in anger, more like disappointment. He said it would mean a lot if I came. I rolled my eyes and went to change clothes anyway. At the family restaurant, everything felt tense. Elias's mother greeted me with a soft smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She asked how work was going. I said busy. She asked if Elias was helping enough at home. I laughed and said he didn't really understand my schedule. Her smile faded a little. Elias looked at me as if he didn't recognize my tone. His brother Nathan joined in, asking if everything was good between us. I said Elias sometimes acted jealous about my career. Elias's mother looked uncomfortable. Nathan looked annoyed. Elias stayed quiet, staring at his glass. During dinner, I made a small joke about how Elias couldn't keep up with my pace. It was meant to be light, but the table fell silent. Nathan cleared his throat. Elias's mother asked if we wanted more bread. Elias stayed completely still. I told myself the family was too sensitive. After all, it was just a harmless joke. I had said worse things to my coworkers, and they laughed. When we got home, Elias set his keys on the counter and asked softly why I kept making him sound small in front of others. I said I was only being honest. He said honesty didn't have to be cruel. I told him he was imagining things. He said he wasn't. I brushed past him, saying I was tired. He didn't stop me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask more questions. He simply said, "Okay," and started cleaning the kitchen like nothing happened. Before bed, I saw his phone light up on the table again. Another alert. Downtown, personal. The time was late, almost the exact moment he usually wound down for the night. I frowned. Elias never went downtown. I told myself it was some new project. I told myself he was trying to impress his team. I didn't ask. Asking meant opening the door to something I might not want to hear. When I lay down, the guest room door clicked shut across the hallway. A quiet, controlled sound. Only then did I realize he wasn't coming to bed. I stared at the ceiling, telling myself this was temporary, that I was still in control, that he only needed time to adjust to the changes in my life. But beneath those thoughts, there was a thin thread of unease I tried hard to ignore. Something was shifting in ways I couldn't name yet, and for the first time, I felt a small pull in my chest. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. I pushed it away and told myself tomorrow would be better. It wasn't. I arrived at the community hall that afternoon feeling like I had something to prove. It was a farewell party for one of our senior analysts, and the whole department was there. People were talking over music, carrying paper plates stacked with snacks. I told myself I was only there to support the team, but really, I wanted to see how Damon acted around me after days of strange distance. I kept replaying his short texts, his curt nods, the way he avoided being alone with me in the office. I told myself he must be stressed. I told myself he still cared about my progress. But when I saw him across the room, laughing too easily with the regional director, something tightened in my chest. I walked over slowly, pretending to look for a drink. When he noticed me, he gave a polite smile, the kind he gave interns. He said he hoped I was enjoying myself. I said we needed to go over some upcoming schedules. He said now wasn't the time. I asked when would be the time. He said he'd let me know. His voice was steady, but his eyes avoided mine. It annoyed me. I felt like he owed me more than that. After all the hours I'd given him, all the risks I took, he was acting like I was just another employee hovering for attention. I hated it. I walked away before my frustration showed too clearly. A group of coworkers waved me over, so I joined them. They were talking about weekend plans. One asked if Elias had finally relaxed about my late nights. I said he had stopped complaining. They took that as a good sign. I didn't correct them. It was easier to let them think I'd won some argument. Someone joked that I must be the one wearing the pants at home. I smirked because it made me feel powerful, even though something inside me knew the dynamic at home had shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. While we talked, I noticed Elias standing near the back of the room by the water dispenser. I hadn't expected him to come, but one coworker had invited him earlier, and I guess he decided to be polite. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't smiling either. He just watched the room with that calm, unreadable expression. When our eyes met, he nodded once. Not cold, not warm, just steady. I felt something twist in me again. I looked away first. A few people asked if Elias was feeling okay. I shrugged and said he always got awkward in crowds. They accepted that explanation. It bothered me that he didn't even try to defend himself, didn't even give me a reason to say something nice about him. Instead, he just existed quietly, letting me shape the narrative however I wanted. For some reason, that silence felt heavier than anger. A coworker suggested a group selfie to remember the event. Everyone gathered near the stage. I positioned myself near the front, pretending I didn't care where Damon stood. But when he stepped beside me, adjusting his tie, I felt my heartbeat quicken. The camera lifted. People leaned closer. Someone pushed slightly from behind, and my arm brushed Damon's shoulder. I didn't move away. Neither did he. It was small, but it felt like a reminder of the attention he once gave me so freely. After the photo, someone teased that I always found my way next to management. I laughed and said it wasn't my fault they liked my work. Damon didn't comment. He stepped back and started a conversation with someone else. That stung more than I expected. I went to refill my cup, needing space to breathe. In the hallway outside the restroom, the sound of the party muffled behind the wall. I leaned against the sink counter and tried to gather myself. I told myself I wasn't losing control, that Damon was just being careful, that he still saw value in me. I held on to that thought tightly. When I walked back into the hall, Elias was talking to one of my coworkers. She looked uncomfortable. He looked calm. When he noticed me, he ended the conversation politely and walked toward the corner. I approached the coworker and asked what he said. She hesitated before saying, "He just asked if everything was okay at work." She said it felt like he wanted to understand something, but didn't know how to ask. I laughed it off, saying he overthinks things, but her eyes softened in a way I didn't like. She said he seemed kind. I shrugged and said kindness wasn't enough in a marriage. She didn't respond. Later, as the event wound down, I saw a small group watching a replay of the selfie. My reflection in the screen looked too comfortable, too close to Damon. I tried to ignore the discomfort rising in my stomach. I told myself it was harmless, but some people exchanged looks. Then the camera view in the reflection shifted slightly, like someone had zoomed in on the moment my arm touched Damon's shoulder. I stepped away before anyone could say anything to me. I found Elias near the exit. He was putting on his jacket, speaking quietly to the event coordinator. When I approached, he smiled faintly and asked if I wanted a ride home. His voice didn't sound hurt or jealous, just steady. That steadiness made me uneasy again. I said I could get a ride with coworkers. He nodded and said, "If that's what you want." No sarcasm, no edge, just acceptance. When I got home later, Elias was already inside. He had left the lights dim. His shoes were placed neatly by the door. I took off my heels and noticed a small flash from the dining table, his laptop still on, a spreadsheet open. I glimpsed columns labeled only with dates and notes. My name appeared in one row. I stepped closer, but he closed the laptop gently before I could read more. I asked what he was working on. He said, "Just organizing." I asked organizing what? He said, "Information." His voice was calm, not defensive. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, like the air had thickened. I said it looked obsessive. He said it looked clear. I laughed and told him clarity wasn't everything. He didn't laugh back. He asked if I enjoyed the event. I said it was fine. He asked if Damon liked the presentation I'd helped with. I told him he was reading too much into things. He nodded like he already expected that answer. Before he went to bed, he picked up his phone and checked something quickly. A notification banner lit the screen. File uploaded successfully. He turned the screen away before I could see more. That night, he slept in the guest room again. I lay awake wondering why the distance felt so deliberate. And for the first time, I wondered if I should be worried. I woke up the next morning feeling heavier than usual, like the air in the apartment had thickened overnight. Elias was already gone. His side of the bed looked untouched, perfectly smooth, like someone had pressed their hand across it to erase any sign of sleep. I walked into the kitchen and saw 2 mugs on the counter, his rinsed clean, mine still sitting where I left it last night, half full and cold. It annoyed me. I told myself he was trying to make a point with that neatness, like he wanted me to notice the distance and feel guilty. But guilt wasn't something I let myself feel easily. At work, things were worse. People looked at me differently. Not openly rude, just curious in a way that made my skin tighten. When I stepped into the break room, 2 women fell silent immediately. One of them quickly changed the subject to weekend plans, but her eyes flicked toward me as if expecting me to confess something. I pretended not to notice. I poured myself coffee and talked loudly about a scheduling error I had fixed. No one asked follow-up questions. Damon passed by the doorway. He didn't stop. He didn't even nod. He just kept walking like I was another piece of furniture in the room. Something inside me twisted. I followed him into the hallway and asked if everything was okay. He said he was busy. I asked if we could talk later. He said he wasn't sure. His voice was polite, but distant in a way that burned. I told myself he was stressed about work, about the upcoming audit, about anything except me. But deep down, I knew he was pulling away. At my desk, I opened my inbox and saw 3 messages from him. All short, all formal, all addressed to the entire team. Not a single private message. Not one sign of the attention he used to give me. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, trying to tell myself it meant nothing. That afternoon, I had to grab groceries before heading home. At the store, I called my sister to vent. I told her Elias was acting strange, that Damon was suddenly distant, that I felt like no one understood how hard I was working. She stayed quiet for a moment and then asked if I wanted the truth or comfort. I said both. She said she thought I was losing control of something I never should have tried to control in the first place. I told her she sounded judgmental. She apologized but didn't change her tone. She said Elias didn't deserve to be treated like a shadow. I told her she didn't know everything. She said she knew enough. I hung up before she could say anything else. Outside, in the parking lot, I saw Elias sitting inside his car. He didn't notice me at first. He was staring at his phone, reading something carefully. When he finally looked up and saw me, he gave a small nod, polite and distant. I walked over and asked what he was doing there. He said he needed detergent and had just finished shopping. I asked why he didn't tell me. He said we didn't have to coordinate every small thing. His voice was soft, but the words felt like a wall. I asked if something was wrong. He said everything was fine. I didn't believe him, and he knew it. He placed his groceries in the trunk and told me to drive safe. Then he left without asking if I needed help. When I got home, I noticed the apartment felt too organized. The guest bed was made again, tighter than usual, like he'd been sleeping there for days. His work bag wasn't by the door, but in the hallway next to the small table he rarely used. A notebook sat on top of it. I picked it up and flipped it open. Inside were simple lists, dates, times, places. Nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory, just quiet order. Elias had never kept lists, not like this. When I closed the notebook, the sound felt too loud for the stillness in the room. I decided to visit him at his project office to force a conversation. When I arrived, he was alone, typing something on his laptop. He barely looked up when I walked in. I asked if he had a minute. He said yes without enthusiasm. I told him I felt like he was pulling away. He said he was giving space. I said space from what? He said from noise. The way he said it made me feel like he was pointing at me without using my name. I glanced around the small office. It looked different, cleaner, more organized. A drawer that was usually half open now sat shut with a soft click. The printer beside him hummed, spitting out a blank page. The faint smell of toner filled the room. I asked what he was working on. He said, just sorting things. I asked why he suddenly cared so much about order. He said, order gives clarity. I laughed and said he was being dramatic. He said he didn't want drama, just facts. His tone was calm, but his words had weight. I placed my hand on the desk, leaning closer. I told him it felt like he was treating me like a stranger. He said he didn't know how to treat me lately. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. Instead, he closed his laptop gently and stood. He said he had another appointment. The way he avoided my eyes made my pulse quicken. I asked if we could talk later. He said we could, but only when he felt ready, not when I demanded it. On the drive home, I tried to calm myself by calling my mother. She listened as I explained the situation, painting myself as the stressed wife whose husband didn't understand her ambition. She told me men often get threatened when a woman grows. She said Elias needed to toughen up. She said I was doing everything right, that I deserved support, not suspicion. I clung to her words because they were easier than the quiet, unsettling truth building inside me. Back at the apartment, I found Elias cooking. He didn't say much, just asked if I had eaten. I said no. He served me a plate without looking at me. I asked if he was upset. He said he wasn't. I asked if he wanted to talk. He said he was tired. I said he always said that. He didn't answer. That night, after he went to the guest room, I walked through the living room and noticed something small but strange. His keys had a new one attached. A silver key I didn't recognize. I picked them up, turned the key between my fingers, and felt a cold ripple through me. I placed them back exactly as they were, and stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself everything was fine. but nothing felt fine anymore, and the silence between us no longer felt harmless. I woke up before sunrise, unable to shake the strange chill that had settled over me the night before. Elias was already gone again. I checked the guest room, but the bed was perfectly made, as if he hadn't touched it. I walked through the silent apartment, trying to convince myself he'd simply left early for work. Still, something felt wrong. The neatness, the missing warmth, the careful way everything in the place had been arranged. None of it matched the man I married. I got ready for work slower than usual. I kept glancing at his side of the closet, noticing how his shirts hung in exact order, spaced evenly. He'd never cared about order before. It felt like walking through a room set up for someone else. At the office, I tried to bury myself in tasks, telling myself I just needed one good day to reset everything. But Damon walked past my desk without a glance. Not a nod, not a gesture. He didn't stop to ask about reports or potential or any of the praise he used to offer so freely. He held a stack of folders and spoke to the analyst beside me as if I wasn't even there. I said his name quietly as he passed. He paused only long enough to say he was heading into a meeting. I told him we needed to talk. He said later. His voice didn't carry any warmth, just polite distance, the type of distance people use when they're already planning their exit. The team noticed, of course. Whispering started up again. A few glances shot my way when Damon closed his office door. One coworker approached and asked if I was okay. I told her everything was fine, that work had simply been stressful. She nodded, but her eyes said she didn't believe me. I turned back to my screen and pretended to type. Later that morning, I messaged Damon asking if he had a minute. He didn't respond. I messaged again. Still nothing. When I walked by his office, he was on the phone, speaking calmly. He didn't look up. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for him to acknowledge me. He never did. Frustrated, I left the office for an early lunch. I went to the rooftop bar alone, the one where our team sometimes met for after-work drinks. The place was mostly empty, the air cool. I sat at a table overlooking the street and tried to breathe. I kept telling myself Damien owed me some conversation, some explanation. I wasn't asking for much. I just wanted to know where I stood. I messaged him again. He finally replied, "We should keep things professional for now." Just 8 words, nothing else. I read them over and over, feeling the heat rise in my chest. After everything I'd risked, after everything I'd stretched and justified, professional was all he had left for me. I called him. He didn't answer. I tried again, straight to voicemail. I left a message sounding steadier than I felt, saying we needed to discuss the project timeline. I told myself that keeping it about work would force him to respond. But I knew what I was really doing, trying to reclaim some piece of control I felt slipping. When I got home early that evening, Elias was in the kitchen preparing something simple. Rice, vegetables, quiet movements. I watched him for a moment before speaking. He didn't turn around when I said hello. I asked about his day. He said it was fine. I asked why he left so early. He said he had errands. I leaned against the counter, studying his face, trying to understand what was happening inside his head. He didn't look angry or hurt or jealous, just calm, too calm. I said I felt like he was avoiding me. He said he wasn't avoiding anything. I said he rarely slept in our bed now. He said he needed rest. I said rest didn't require sleeping in another room. He said sometimes it did. I felt myself getting frustrated again. I told him he was acting like the problem here was me. He didn't respond. He just stirred the pot gently. That silence pushed me further. I told him work had been stressful because people made assumptions. I told him Damon had been distant and unhelpful. I told him I felt alone in everything. He finally looked at me then. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A kind of quiet acceptance, or maybe something heavier. He asked if I had ever thought about how my actions looked from the outside. I said, people misunderstood things all the time. He said people usually misunderstood only when someone gave them something confusing to look at. I told him to stop talking in riddles. He said he wasn't. He was being direct. That irritated me even more. I told him he didn't understand how complicated work relationships could be. He said he understood more than I thought. We ate together in silence. The distance between us felt wider than the room. Later, I went into the bedroom and found my sister had texted again, asking if I wanted to come stay with her for the weekend. I rolled my eyes. She always assumed I needed rescuing. I told her everything was under control. She simply replied, "It doesn't look like it." I put the phone down hard. When Elias came into the doorway, he leaned against the frame. His shoulders looked straighter than usual, his posture calm but firm. He said he had been thinking about everything. I crossed my arms and told him I hoped he realized how unfair he was being. He didn't react. He said he wanted me to know something now, clearly, so there would be no confusion later. His voice stayed even, steady, too controlled. He said, "I'm going to handle this properly." My breath caught for a moment. I asked what that meant. He didn't elaborate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He simply repeated, softer this time, "Properly." Then he walked out of the room before I could press him further. I sat down on the edge of the bed, replaying the word again and again. Properly. I didn't know why, but it made my stomach twist. I told myself he was being dramatic, that he would calm down, that I still had time to fix everything. But deep down, I felt the shift happen. The moment something in him settled, something decisive, something final. And I couldn't unhear that calm word echoing through the quiet apartment. The next morning, the sky looked too bright, like it was trying too hard. I left the apartment early, telling myself I was going to talk to Damon and finally straighten things out. I rehearsed what I would say the entire drive, how he had made promises, how I had supported him, how he owed me clarity. Every sentence made me feel like I still had control, even though a quieter part of me knew I didn't. When I stepped into the office tower lobby, the sound of heels on polished floors echoed around me. People milled about, chatting, waiting for elevators, scrolling on their phones. Everything felt normal, which only made the heaviness in my chest more confusing. I kept checking my messages, hoping Damon had written something. Nothing. Not a single word from him since yesterday. I went to the reception desk and asked if Damon was in yet. The receptionist smiled politely and said he was in a meeting. I asked if she could tell him I needed to see him. She said she would pass the message along. I thanked her, trying to look composed. I walked toward the seating area, planning to wait, planning to look calm and confident in case anyone was watching. Then I saw Elias. He stood near the far wall, hands in his pockets, posture straight, face unreadable. He wasn't dressed for his office. He wasn't carrying his work bag. He looked like he'd been waiting for a while. For me. My first instinct was irritation. Why was he here? In my space? In my building? But irritation quickly mixed with something tighter, something that made my breath shallow. I walked up to him, trying to look annoyed instead of nervous. I asked why he was here. He said he had things to finish. I asked what things. He didn't answer. He only said, "You'll see." I hated that answer. It felt too calm, too prepared. I told him this wasn't the place for whatever he was planning to talk about. He said he agreed. He said talking wasn't necessary anymore. Before I could respond, a man and a woman in business attire approached us. They looked professional, neutral, almost expressionless. The woman asked for my name. I said yes, that was me. She handed me a thick envelope. The man handed me a second one. Both were sealed, heavy, official-looking. For a moment, I didn't understand what was happening. I asked what all this was. The woman said she was serving documents on behalf of legal counsel representing Elias Monroe. Her tone was clean, practiced. She said I should read them carefully. She said acknowledgement wasn't required to proceed. People around us had begun to slow down, glancing over, sensing the tension. My hand shook as I held the papers. I turned toward Elias, demanding he explain himself. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move toward me or away. He just said, "This is the proper way." His calmness made me feel unsteady, like the floor had shifted under my shoes. I tore open the first envelope, not caring that my fingers bent the edges. The first page made my breath catch. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a warning. It was a formal separation notice, a request to freeze joint accounts, a protective division he'd filed to secure his share of assets. Detailed notes outlining workplace misconduct tied to my name. Clear steps he was now taking to protect himself, financially, professionally, socially. I skimmed the lines, my vision blurring. I looked up at him and accused him of ambushing me. He said none of this was sudden. He said I had seen the signs. He said I chose not to. I opened the second envelope with shaking hands. It was a civil complaint, a lawful request demanding removal of false comments I had made about him at work and among family. Documentation of the ways I had publicly humiliated him. A statement of reputational harm. Requirements for me to cease any further claims about him regarding jealousy, insecurity, or obstruction to my career. All of it written cleanly, factually, without anger. I could feel people staring now, phones lifting, whispering. I wanted to tell them they were misunderstanding everything. I wanted to say Elias was overreacting, that Damon could clear it all up, that this wasn't what it looked like. But when I glanced toward the elevators, I saw something that made my throat tighten. Damon stepped out of one elevator, saw the crowd, saw me holding papers, saw Elias standing a few feet away, and immediately stepped back inside. He didn't speak. He didn't look sorry. He just pressed a button and let the doors close. That was the moment something cracked in me. Not guilt, not yet, but the understanding that I was completely alone. I turned back to Elias and told him we could talk privately, that this didn't need to happen in front of everyone. He shook his head. He said everything that needed to happen had already happened. He said the documents spoke for themselves. He said he wasn't here to argue or explain or negotiate. He said, "I'm done being framed as the villain." I felt heat rush to my face. My voice came out too sharp, too loud. I told him he was ruining both of our lives. He said he was protecting his. He said I was free to rebuild mine however I wanted. He said this wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I tried to step closer. The woman serving documents moved slightly, not blocking me, just reminding me the moment was still official, still public, still binding. Elias didn't step back. He didn't step forward. He just stood there, steady, quiet, resolved. For a second, I could barely breathe. I asked him, one last time, if he was really doing this. He said, "Yes." Then he turned away, walking toward the glass doors with measured steps, sunlight hitting his shoulders, as if the world outside had already opened for him. I stood in the center of the lobby, holding the papers he left behind, my hands trembling, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out the noise around me. People stared. Some whispered. Some recorded. The air felt too bright, too sharp. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. All I could do was stand there, the documents heavy in my grip, as the last pieces of the life I thought I controlled slipped away in front of everyone.